Kosoko, how was your day?
It's been great. I'm been relaxing. Not really relaxed. I've been working all day, but I got vaccinated today, so that's great. I got
Yay! Oh, that's
stabbed in the
awesome.
arm, drove
Love
three
that.
hours south to get a vaccine, have to go back in like 21 days, but yeah.
Oh my goodness. A 6 hour round trip.
Yeah, and I have to do it again. It's gonna be hot girl summer this summer. I'm prepared.
Ooh, it's great.
I'm texting all my
Yeah,
friends like, what song are we twerking to at the club?
literally. My state opens up everybody's vaccines next month and I'm
Uh-oh.
already I'm already looking to schedule mine.
Already ready. You're like, who
I'm
do I
ready.
talk to now?
When's the day? When can I start?
Yeah, literally, like my CVS was like, you can come on Tuesday, like on Thursday. You can come on Tuesday at 10 a.m. And I was like, I'll be there.
I'll be there.
Right.
Thanks.
How was your day?
My day was really good. It was super productive. Yesterday I had like a major headache, so I kind of dipped out of work school early.
Okay.
But
I mean,
that just
self
meant that
care.
I had to get up earlier today to catch up. Um, but yeah, every day it's just work, school, this.
You're in grad school, right?
Yeah, I'm in grad school. But yeah, but it was really nice today. So I did like sneak outside for a little bit to get some vitamin D, some fresh
Good.
air.
Well, that's good. That's important.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. Welcome to the March Teen Book Club. We're here chatting with Kosoko Jackson, who wrote Yesterday is History. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you for
Look at
having me.
it.
I feel like I should hold
Yes,
up the
I have my
book.
copy here too.
Oh, look at that.
It's all annotated and everything.
Uh-oh. You got notes.
Yes. So just to mention a couple of things, today's event, we will be picking three lucky winners in the chat. So if you're registered, you can win a prize. Definitely check out the chat for all of the links. There you will also find a Google form where you can submit any questions that you would like Kosoko to answer or for us to talk about. So yes, please make sure that you do submit the questions through the Google Doc so that we can see them. So let's begin. Kosoko, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. So hi everyone. My name is Kosoko Jackson. I am the author of Yesterday's History, which came out almost 2 months ago. Yeah, February 2nd. So it's almost been 2 months by the wonderful Sourcebooks Fire. It is a science fiction romance that follows Andre Cobb, for all those who don't know, who's an African-American teen who gains the ability to time travel after a liver transplant and starts a love triangle between an activist in 1969 and the younger brother of the organ donor who comes from a family of time travelers.
That's fascinating. I remember when I first heard that synopsis and I was just like, check, 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 everything I'm interested in.
Well, thank you. Because when I first wrote the synopsis, I was like, no one's going to pick up this book at all. It's crazy and no one's going to want to read it. Kosoko, why are you doing this?
Not at all. I love it. It's BIPOC, it's queer, it's romance, it's time traveling. I was obsessed immediately.
Well, that makes my heart warm. So thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of like time travel and everything about the book, like I'm super interested, like what inspired you to write this book? Like how did this thought first come into your head?
Sure. So nothing I do in life is easy. And so when I first came up with like wanting to write I've always loved science fiction. So I knew from a young age I wanted to, when I knew I wanted to be a writer, I knew I wanted to write science fiction. And I knew I didn't want to write like very, I don't want to say boring, but very normal, like white led science fiction. And I wanted to have like a POC twist to it. And so I was trying to think of something to write while I was at BEA in 2018, which was a book expo, which no longer exists. Rest in peace. I was touring New York City and I like went to Stonewall because like I was like, I'm gay, I'm in New York, I should like look at our history. And then I was like
Yeah.
touring bookstores and it kind of just clicked because I was looking in the adult book section and a lot of adult books have like historical fiction about a woman who discovers like in her attic letters from her grandmother in like 1940 and bounces through time. And I was like, I love that trend. I am weak for a good like period piece. And so I was like, well, how do we do this for teenagers? How do we do this in a POC way? And how do we add science fiction to it? So then I kind of just fired off an email to my agent, Jim McCarthy, and I was like, what if we had a boy who got a blood donation that tied him to like the past of somebody who, sorry, what if he got a blood donation from a girl who had an ancestor in the past who was like important in history, and so it like tied them together, and then he was like tethered to him. So that was like the first version, and then to add a more human aspect, we turned it from blood donation to like a liver transplant.
Yeah, that was amazing. That's so cool. It's so cool, like how something can just spark a random thought in your head, and it can just lead to this.
Yeah, to that. That's exactly what happened. And then he was like, yeah, this is like crazy, but let's do it. And then that became that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And something else that I really love about the book is how much fun I had reading it. Like, it was such an enjoyable read that really made me like smile and laugh. And while of course there's like a lot of conversations that happened throughout yesterday's history, overall it's a really fun, happy book. Like, it's just about a boy who has a connection with two other boys. And it's really fascinating. And I'm just curious, like, I know that you wanted to write something that was Black joy versus a lot of books out there that deal on Black pain. And I'm kind of curious, like, if you could talk a little bit about that and why that is so important to you.
Sure. Like as like a Black queer man, like I grew up in, when I was younger, especially, very much sound like an old person, but like back in my day, every single queer story was like the kid was closeted, or the kid was Black and grew up in the ghetto and gay, and the kid either died, was beat up, or got HIV. And so that was like the only story that I had when I was younger. I was like, well, I guess these are my three options. And so I wanted to change that narrative. And as I mentioned earlier, like I'm really obsessed with period pieces. Any story that has like a female main character that bucks society against like someone who's like more roguish, and they fall in love, and maybe there's a screaming match in the rain, like I'm all over it. Doesn't matter if I've seen the story 100 times. And so I was like, how do I kind of put that vibe in this book? And like, how do I make a book that has a happy ending? Because at the core, I wanted teens, especially Black queer teens, to be like, it's possible to have love. And we often do not see Black characters, female identifying, male identifying, or anywhere in between, being the focus of the love triangle. They're usually maybe an element of it, one of the love interests, and usually it's like ambiguous Black. And so I wanted to like have like a very like a dark skinned, like actively Black man, like be the love interest of two people, and have it like not be a race thing, and just have it be teens who are like in love. And I thought that was really important for me to see when I was younger. And I think in the turn, it's like important for teens to see now.
I 100% agree. It's so important for teens to see. I'm not a teen anymore, but like even at my age, it made me feel all gooey inside. And like I was like, oh my god, I want that. I want to be that.
Good. That's good. Because when you look at a book for like 3 years straight, the words are just kind of words on a page, and you're like, is this invoking any positive emotion, or are these just like boring words?
How many times can I look at this?
Yes. There was a point where like I got edits from Annie and from the copy editor, and they were like, but why is he in this room? And I was like, because he is. He's just in the room because he is. There's no reason. Can we get past this page, please?
I'm sick of looking at it. I get that feeling completely. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about the science fiction element of it. I'm also a huge sci-fi fan. I love sci-fi, and I specifically love time traveling. Like, I've always said, like, if I could have a superpower, and like if it wasn't mind control, because like I don't want to be a super villain, maybe I would probably be like a time traveler.
Okay.
So that's, like I said, one of those things that checks it off. If you tell me there's time travel in the book, I'm interested. So I'm interested, like, what about time travel interested you? Why was time travel, I know you said you like a lot of like historical pieces, and I was like, what exactly about time travel interests you, and why was that like a key point in the story?
So I think if you had asked me probably like this when I was younger, like 3 years ago, I probably would have said because it was just like an element that I wanted to include. But as I've gotten older and learned about my writing, the idea for the book, kind of like a one sentence summary, comes to life first, and then how to build around that kind of forms around it. And so when I wanted to write the story that talked about how LGBT rights and things have changed, and also how Black things have changed from the past, and how they're kind of also the same. The best way to show that to me without having a straight historical book or have a book that was just like reading diary entries was to have it split into two different narratives. But then I was like, I don't want to do that. So then time travel became the way because I like science fiction. But also, like, again, I try to make things difficult for myself, even without intentional. And time travel is one of those things that you hear from like readers and editors and stuff that like you don't do time travel in a book because it's complicated. You also don't do love triangles because they're also complicated, and then does both. So I like to do challenges. I say that every book that I write, whether it sells or not, I try to learn something from it and I try to push myself a little bit more. And so for me, this was like, can I write two basically parallel narratives and feel like they each have full arcs? So, and I feel like I've done that. I probably shouldn't be on Goodreads, but I do know that some people feel like I have not done it, but some people think I have done it.
I completely think that you have. I used to be that kind of person. I was like, oh, I hate love triangles and blah, blah, blah. But I realized like I didn't like it because it was difficult to find a good love triangle where like both people had like equal weight in them. Like I actually didn't know who the character would end with. And I think you really succeeded with this book in really fleshing out like both of Andre's love interest. And it really was like up until the end, I really wasn't sure like who he was actually going to end up with.
Oh, well, that's good. Do not expect another love triangle from me again. You're not going to get one. But
it's good. Moving on.
I just remember my first edit letter. My editor was like, "So Blake's love arc is perfect. You got perfect pacing. Michael's feel like we only have 10 pages. Like with him on the." And I was like, "I've been working on this for 8 months. How is it only 10 pages?" And it was actually 10 pages. So they are hard for me, but I'm so glad it paid off because I really love this book.
Yeah, I really love it too, and I definitely think you did an amazing job successfully implementing a love triangle and writing like double timelines. Like that's just, I can't even imagine. I think that's awesome. And talking about like the double timelines and specifically about like the McIntyre family and their whole like time traveling thing, I thought it was really interesting when the book introduced like the 3 rules for time travelers. And like the one that really stuck out to me was like, we don't go into the future. And I wanted to know if you could like talk about that a little bit more, about the rules, about why they're important, like for our characters, for Andre specifically.
Sure, of course. And just for like everyone who has not read the book, like the 3 rules are that number 1, you can only do like one jump at a time. So you can't jump to like the Titanic and then jump again. You have to go back to your present time. Number 2, you can't try to change the past. And also number 3, you can't jump to the future. And so I thought that was important because one of the biggest pitfalls I read about science fiction was that people just felt like there weren't enough framework to actually make it feel like it actually has limitations. It's very much like other superpowers you read in books of people like, well, why doesn't the person just do this? Or why doesn't the person just do that? And so half of the reason why I made those rules, because I wanted there to be a framework that was strong enough that made the time travel feel like it has limitations. But at the same time, because teen books are all about bucking like authority, I wanted to make them flexible enough that if Andre does buck authority, he doesn't like break the space-time continuum. So like that's like a really important thing. And so that's like the idea behind the 3 rules. Then not jumping into the future was kind of my own safeguard, because when I was writing it the first couple times, I was like, well, why doesn't Andre just go into the future to just like figure everything out? And so I wanted to create some type of rule that kind of put that in place. In my sense, that's kind of just protecting myself, so I don't like get that question, and so I don't create that internal just like, well, but why in the situation?
But why wouldn't you just do this?
Exactly. But also when I try to make these rules, I wanted to make them feel like actual real limitations. Like if a society of time travelers came together and you could just go into the future to figure anything out, then you could figure out what the next great stock was, and then you could just manipulate it to your own benefit. And so I tried to make them actually feel like humanistic rules.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I feel like time travel can get really muddy in some stories because of all the paradoxes that come into play. And so like I really appreciated when your book did introduce these rules and limitations to the power.
Right. Exactly, because that's what it is. It's basically taking the principle that in any fantasy book, if a character has a gift, there has to be a downside or a limitation to it.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes it human.
Right, and more accessible. I feel like if you can just do whatever, then like what's the point?
Then why are we even here?
Right, why are we here?
Just go into the future. Yeah. I loved the dual timelines. I really loved how Michael was set in like the 60s and 70s. And then of course we had our present day. And it's a good 50 years. And I thought it was really interesting time period. I'm sure like I kind of got the nuances of like seeing some of the queer rights elements coming in around that time, but I am really interested in like kind of why did you pick that time specifically? And also like I know you said you like these like history stuff, but did you have to do like a lot of extensive research? Because there's lots of details in that timeline. It really feels like we're actually there when reading those chapters.
So I picked that timeline specifically because it's like the nexus of marginalized rights. We have the LGBT movement, we have Stonewall in 1969, which the original draft had a much heavier Stonewall element. The original draft took place in New York, and Stonewall was like a very prominent thing. So that's why it was in 1969. We also have the Vietnam War, we have the civil rights movement. And so it just seemed like a perfect point with Andre being Black and gay to have all of those nexus of like converging dichotomies and versions of himself, him being Black, him being gay, the civil rights movement, the LGBT movement, kind of all there to be a representation of himself as a character. So the setting itself is a representation. And so that's why it was important for me to have it there in that time period. As for research, I did a decent amount of research, not like a huge amount, partially because I have older parents. So my mother was very active during the civil rights movement. She left home because my grandparents are like, if you join the civil rights movement, then you can't come back home. And she's like, well, I guess I'm not coming back home.
Well, I guess I'm out of here then.
Right, I guess I'm out. And then eventually she did come back home. But so like I've grown up with like a lot of the civil rights stories. I went to the March on Washington in the 90s with my dad. So like my family is very like Black activist. So that helped a significant amount. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's really nice to have that kind of like firsthand account from your parents.
Yes, exactly.
Of the little bit of research that you did do, was there anything like especially funny that you came across or like weird or something that you didn't expect?
So two things. One is, and it's in the book, and I do not remember the exact name because it's been a while since I've read this book, but the newspaper that that Michael goes to work for. Michael, in a specific part of his time, goes to work for a newspaper, an LGBT paper, which is very much like the Village Voice, which was a prominent New York LGBT paper, but in Boston, was a real newspaper. That's a real actual newspaper. It actually existed during the 1969, and they did a lot of reporting. And I read some of their articles to feel like, was this like a vibe? And I was like, I've never heard of this newspaper. I've heard of the Village Voice. I've never heard of it. And doing more research, I realized that there were small newspapers all over the country, especially after Stonewall, that did like a lot of like LGBT news, even if it was like underground and like counterculture. These newspapers existed all over the country. And it's kind of cool to see this like underground railroad of LGBT news, which like has existed. The thing that is funny, because I was thinking about this question, that I left out a very important historical event during my book that happened literally during the book, which is landing on the moon. We landed on the moon in July 9th, 1969, and there is no mention of it at all in the book. So
everyone in Boston's just chilling. Right. We don't even care what's going on up there.
War, but I was just like, wait, this does take place in July. We would have talked about the moon landing. It's what everybody was talking about. So I guess we know what a bonus chapter will be of the book self.
Yay! Oh my gosh, yes, please. That's like I didn't even realize that until you said it now too.
Oh yeah. I was like, wait. I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, 1916. I know the moon landing, and I was like, well, maybe it happened in like November, because Sesame Street's first episode I knew was in November. So I was like, well, maybe it happened sometime around. Nope, it happens in the book.
Literally right there.
Literally.
While Michael's smoking in his room and trying to get Andre to drink.
On the moon. We are changing history, and these two boys are just arguing about alcohol.
I love that. That's hilarious. I'm sure as an author, you put a lot of yourself in your books, and I am curious to ask, like, what parts of the characters that we got to read do you see yourself in? Like, where can we really see you in these characters?
Oof. There's a little bit of me, I think, in everybody. So Andre is very much like a type A type person. Like he wants to be a doctor in the beginning of the book. That was very me in high school. I told my parents at the dinner table when I was 6 that I wanted to be a doctor. And so when I went to college, my parents were like, you're gonna be a doctor. I went to a like feeder program for MD PhD students. I was gonna become an infectious disease doctor with a focus, an internal medicine doctor with a focus on infectious diseases. I had a whole plan. That
Wow.
Did not happen.
You see me here now.
Right. I work in public. I don't work. I have a degree in public health. I'm getting my master's in public health starting next year. I work in
Congratulations.
Thank you. I cannot stop going to school. It's my second master's, and my parents are like, stop.
No, I feel you. I'm like, I don't want to stop.
So that part of me, that very type A, like, and then I in college very much like didn't know what I wanted to do. I was valedictorian of my very, very small school. And so then I dropped out of college because I had a panic attack when I first got into like the real world. So I kind of took all those feelings and scrunched it into Andre's like, what am I doing with my life now that I'm not gonna be able to graduate on time from high school? So that was like that representation. I went to a private school, so a very white, very ritzy private school. So if you met high school me now, you'd be ashamed because high school me was very waspy. High school me was not a great person. And so like the beginnings of Blake kind of represents me and the environment that I grew up in. And then Michael, because I work in digital communications for nonprofits. So his like activism side of me is kind of like what I do now. So they're all kind of like Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, Future-esque versions of like who I've become.
I love that.
It was fun. It was fun to be like, how much of an asshole were you in high school?
Let's just put that in this character.
Right.
Yeah. That's really funny.
Yeah, it was a good way to like kind of craft the characters to like figure out a defining characteristic and then like make a character around them.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I think you did a great job. Like I do feel like all three of the boys that we meet are very individual, fully fleshed out characters.
Well, that's good considering each of the love interests only get half screen time. So you gotta do like a whole arc in less than half the pages. So yeah.
Right. So it just makes it that much more impressive to me. Because I remember, 100 pages into the book, I was already like, oh my gosh. Michael's doing this, Blake is doing this.
Maybe I am decent at writing. Maybe all my night sweats about like you should be a peach farmer are false.
Yeah, a little something. That's really funny. With your night sweats, I'm sure I'm sure writing a book is incredibly stressful and challenging. Like what part was the most challenging with this book?
Getting all the two timelines right. So if this was a singular timeline book, or if it was set in the same time period with like maybe Michael being on like a different side of the tracks-esque story, this would have been significantly easier because the balancing of not only the romance to make sure we had the romantic arcs that made it seem fleshed out, but also the time travel, giving it enough space on the page so it didn't feel like an afterthought and then also enough historical elements so it felt like this book actually did have like past feelings and not just words on a page. All of those are in them of itself enough to take up 300 pages, and I was trying to do it all in 275 pages. And so it was just like a lot to balance, and I learned a lot from this book. I learned that I can do this, like I can cram a lot into a book, but I also learned like the importance of like editing. Like I think one draft of this book was like 97,000 words, and it was just too much superfluous stuff that wasn't needed. And then making it leaner makes the emotional arc stronger for me. And so like learning that about myself is super important.
I think that's amazing.
I try to learn something from every book. So
I love that. Try to learn something every day.
Yeah, every day if I can. And sometimes it's just how to like cook your eggs so they don't burn.
Literally, just let me call my mom real quick. I actually Googled the other day like how to clean my couch comforter.
Right? Did you figure it out?
No. Because the tag on it says I can't put it in the washer, so I don't know. I think I have to go buy like upholstery cleaner or something.
Does it say you can't put it in the washer or you can't put it in the dryer?
Like both.
Oh, you probably need to hand wash it then. I think you need to put it in the tub.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Adulting. Well, with how much you've learned from this book, I know you're working on some other things now. Would you like to share with us?
Sure. So I don't stop working. So I have my next YA, which is currently entitled All Kingdoms Must Fall, but it's going to get a name change, and I don't think I can reveal that yet. Is a very different book. It is basically a Black Lives Matter meets internment by Samir Ahmed, and it follows a Black journalist after a Black Lives Matter protest in Baltimore, who goes to Baltimore to take photos because he wants to get into a really competitive photography program, who is embroiled in a plot when the riots break out in Baltimore and the government of Maryland decides to enact basically a giant impenetrable dome over Baltimore that isolates everybody inside of Baltimore from the outside. So no information, nothing can leave the dome, and kind of all the like police brutality that happens when no one is watching, and the police have very high-tech weaponry, very much like Iron Man like weapons, SWAT gear, and he teams up with a Latino hacker and then an Afro-Latino woman who is AWOL from basic training to basically take down this giant dome and to take down basically the oppressive police state. I wrote it after George Floyd in the summertime because I was like, I need to do something. And it's a very different book. It's very much like if you took the words ACAB and put it into a book, this is like 90,000 words of that. I'm gonna say it right now, there are no good cops in this book. It's like a complete commentary about that. And like, there's also no good white people in this book. So like, that's just something we have to like deal with right now. And I've thought about it every day and how I'm publishing this book and this is gonna come out. It's gonna be great.
Amazing.
Thank you. It's like, it was very much like I had another book planned with my editor. We had like pitched it and everything. And then I was like, I got on the phone. I was like, I need to do something. And I came up with this idea and she was like, I really appreciate source books. And they were like, just run with it. And I was like, yeah, let's run with it. So I like wrote it in a fever dream of like 4 months.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, very fast.
That's incredible though. I mean, I can already imagine it, but at the same time, I'm like super excited to read it.
I like it. I haven't looked at it since December, so I hope it's still good. But it was very cathartic for me as someone who I worked in the field where I really couldn't do anything. I worked in digital communications. I had a lot of clients that were doing like a lot of like Black Lives Matter stuff. But as like a digital communicator, because I worked for a nonprofit, we had to be impartial. And then it was the whole conversations about impartiality versus like when you do nothing, you're also complicit. And so it was very weird, and it was very hard. And so I was like, let's put it into a book.
Yeah, I think that sounds amazing. It sounds like it was almost kind of cathartic for you too.
Yeah, it was very cathartic. It's very good. I was trying to say the main character's name. I haven't looked at that book in so long, I don't remember my main character's name. So but the main character, I'm like, who is the star of this book?
What was your name again?
Right. I was like, open up my computer. What was your name? I don't remember his name, but he's very different than Andre. He is a photographer. He is like very much more artistic, and it's like a book about like going against the police state. So there's violence. So he has to go from this boy whose best skill is getting your perfect like shot with a camera to learning how to scale a building.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Sounds super action packed.
It's very action packed, which, as I said, I try to teach myself everything in something in this book. This book is how to write action scenes. So let's hope they're good.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
I'm mad that it's not coming sooner.
It comes out in a year, so we don't have that long to wait. I'm just like, in like 6 months, I'm gonna have to start promoting this book too.
Okay, good. I can't wait. I hope we get a copy.
Oh, 100%. We'll make it happen. We got it.
Wonderful. A question that I love to ask just all authors and writers is like, what is the best writing advice that you have? What is some writing advice that like you take with you on every story that you write?
Sure. So for me, the best writing advice that I have ever come up with, and I've been writing off and on since like I was like 6 years old, which I mean, like I've always loved to write, but I started writing seriously in like 2013. So I've been writing for a while, and it's taken me a long time to come up with my own like drafting process. And it's very wild. I probably spend more time prepping for writing than I actually do writing. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I write a lot of books and I talk about a lot of books, and I also draft very fast. So I can draft a 90,000 word book in a good day in probably 2.5 months. So
Wow.
it's because I do so much planning in the beginning. I write like publisher weekly announcements, I fake publisher weekly announcements, I write desk jackets, I write chapter beat sheets, I write outlines. And so like that's my style. I come up with a playlist. I spend a lot of prep time. And for me, that works. It doesn't work for everybody else. And sometimes when I have friends who are like, I need help fast drafting, I like tell them and they're like, okay, so you don't really fast draft, you just spend the same amount of time that somebody would take to write a whole book, spending half of that plotting. But that works for me. And it's like great to talk about writing with other people. And so I think it's important for writers to come up with their own style. And whatever that is, like be really protective of your style because it works for you. It might sound absolutely outlandish to other people.
Speaking of outlandish, like are there any like really weird or quirky things that are specific for you in your writing that like just work for you, but it might be kind of weird for somebody else?
I think the publisher's weekly announcement thing is pretty weird when I tell people, and I go deep. So I go deep. I will be like, so a good example is like, I also have adult rom-coms coming out from Penguin Random House next year. And so when I first wrote that publisher's weekly announcement, I was like, Kosoko Jackson's rom-com, I'm So Not Over You, in a competitive 6-house auction was bought by Christine Schwartz. I go deep. I imagine, do I want movie rights sold? Do I want foreign rights sold? And if I want foreign rights, which countries have already been sold to? I do a lot of manifesting to make this a reality because that works for me. I'm very flighty as an author. Again, if you see me on Twitter, and do not call me out on this, anyone, I've probably talked about 4 books that I've been writing this year, probably not writing any of them. But like, that's just my agent knows this. I've probably pitched him 30 books in this year already, and it's only March. But that's like how I work. I pitch a lot. I do a lot of pitching because it's like how I weed through all the ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's great. That like manifestation thing is actually really cool. I like kind of feel like I want to implement that, like kind of getting in that mindset that like it is happening. So I better
and it helps to like, right, it's basically making it like a thing. I'm basically manifesting the future that I want.
I think that's great. It looks like we're starting to get some questions from the audience. So
ooh, questions.
Yes, let's see. We have an audience question from Sophie that said, what made you get into writing and at what age did you write your first book?
Okay, so depends on what you call a book. So what I thought was a book when I was 6 years old was a story about these 3 kids who went into the forest to go camping in their backyard, discovered that there was like a tomb back there and a bear, like a zombie bear lived back there, and then it ate the children. That wasn't a real book, but I was 6 years old and I was very proud of that. No, I've never been okay. I've absolutely never been okay. And that is part of what makes a good writer. My first serious book that I wrote was without like any like edits, like my first good draft was when I was, I think, 15 years old. It was an epic fantasy called The Children of Tyr. I still remember it. It was like these 4 children, each like a representation of the different elements, who were like quarter parts of a goddess that represented like the earth. And it had deep commentary about religion because the whole thing was that like, are these children actually representations of the goddess, or are they just like trying to just like game the system while like fighting bad guys? It was very weird, but I love it very much.
That sounds awesome.
And as for what got me into writing, before I forget that one, I just read a lot. The Bartimaeus trilogy was one of my favorite middle grade series. I read DJ McHale's 10-book series, Pendragon. And like, I grew up in a town that was an hour away from where my school was. And my school was all mostly white kids. So like, as a Black queer kid, even at a young age, knowing I was queer, books were my escape.
That's amazing. But an hour and away, it's a good reading time.
Yeah, I read a lot of books in the car.
Let's see. We also have a question from Aiden that says, if you could time travel to a year, what year would you go to?
Funny. Every event I get to ask this question and I play myself every single time and I never have an answer. But I know the answer that I've never said that I want to say. My favorite artist is Tracy Chapman. She has an amazing song called Fast Car, the best song that's ever been written in our generation. Listen to it, it's beautiful. It's also a queer anthem because she never uses pronouns, and we know she's talking about a woman. I want to see that song in concert. I want to go back to the 70s. I want to cry in the front stage. I want to just mouth those words. And she's like, how do you know these words? It's my first time performing it. And I'm just like, I got you.
We are connected.
You don't need to know, girl. Just keep singing.
Just keep singing. I'm here with you.
Hey.
That is hilarious. I love that answer. We have another question from Ingra that says, does writing this genre exhaust or energize you? And how are you feeling after this book?
I'm guessing you mean by the genre of science fiction. It's exhausting, partially because there's not much YA science fiction. So if you get into writing or if you do a lot of reading, you'll probably notice that there's more fantasy than science fiction under the speculative umbrella. And that's because a lot of editors and reviewers believe that science fiction doesn't sell for young adults, because if you read adult science fiction, it's very nitty gritty about like the gear helps us draft into the 17th drive where the metal warps, and it's like very nerdy. And I'm like, great, I'm a nerd and I like this, but like, can't my explanation just be there's giant mechs outside that are 100 feet tall because we like need something to defend our galaxy? Like, isn't that enough? And so it's hard to find other science fiction authors out there. Now, there are definitely many of them, a good amount of them, and I know a lot, I know most of them, but I think it's exhausting because it's kind of like publishing is very much in many ways like a Highlander syndrome. It's very, you have to remember that it's not a competitive competition against other authors, even though publishing kind of makes it feel like that unintentionally and sometimes intentionally. And so it's also like, is this book commercial enough to sell, knowing that science fiction is so hard to sell? And so that exhausts me. As for how I feel after this book, I am very proud of Yesterday's History. It was a book that I did not think I was ever going to be able to write. It was a very weird time travel book. If you had asked me 5 or 7 years ago, I would have never said I could write this book. And it's gotten really good reception, not only with like, there's 32 people here, which is more than I ever thought would be in a book event of mine. I've seen like other Black and queer teens have like reached out to me that like, I had a Black queer male teen reach out and say, Andre looks like me, and I've never seen myself on the cover. And like, that's just like, that's huge. Like, that's a huge thing to hear, especially when like, look at your bookshelf and how many, and there's nothing wrong with this, but like how many like blonde white girls on the cover? Millions of them. And it's like, we don't get representation. And so I'm really happy that I got to like bring that to life.
Yeah, me too. I as a Black queer, I mean, it's just always incredible to see. And I'm just so happy that we're kind of slowly beginning to put more of these books on shelves for the younger generation.
Exactly. And I think it's really important. I mean, I wish I had these books when I was younger.
100%. I agree. We have another question from Brianna that says, where did the idea for Isabelle's character come from?
Okay, bringing up Isabelle, a character no one ever asked about because she's barely on the page, which is a fair critique. I just want to say, if anybody has ever said that to me, and I've had people like in my emails like, Isabelle's not on the page enough. And I was like, you know what? I can grow as an author and I will take this and become better. Here's the thing. I believe that behind every amazing queer male, there is a badass girl best friend who takes no prisoners. So every single book of mine will always have a gay male and a female sidekick. I think it's incredibly important. I think it's one of the most important relationships a gay male could have in their life. I will take that to my grave. I will do a TED talk about the importance of that relationship. And I wanted Andres to be someone who's also a POC. I think it's easy to default to like having like, especially Black gay men often sometimes have like white best friends, because like that's a whole different conversation we can have. And I wanted to have somebody who was also a POC, but has like different issues than what Andre has. She has like divorce issues with her parents. And so I just want her to be like just a girl in his life that he could rely on, and someone who was a best friend. And there was other drafts that had more of her and had more of her journey. Also, in the end of the book, you learn that she's going off to Italy for a professional event. It's very important for me to also have smart characters in my book, especially smart POC characters. I just think there are so many representations of POCs in books that are struggling. I like writing POCs who are upper middle class, if not the upper group of society, because that representation is important.
I completely agree. Like, that was something I loved about reading this book, is that we didn't necessarily have a Black kid who was living in the ghetto or in a single parent household, or a lot of these stories that are often told, that he had well-off parents, and like he even said that they were able to afford his transplant surgery.
Right. Which is expensive.
He goes to a very fancy school.
And they're both like scientists, like they're both like intelligent African American people. And Isabelle is also intelligent, and he's surrounded himself around like intelligent people. I mean, honestly, if we want to be honest, the dumbest person in the book is Blake. Blake is a himbo, and I'm like, that's okay.
That's hilarious. He is though. That was a really good question, because I did really love Isabelle's character, and I kind of see like I would have liked more from her, but it also wasn't her story.
Right, exactly.
So, but yeah, she's great. Like, she cracked me up because like I have Isabelles in my life.
I think everybody needs an Isabelle.
Everybody needs an Isabelle is great. Like, I remember when they were first going over to the house, she was like,
right, like, why are we here? And for people who like Isabelle, the Afro-Latina inside of All Kingdoms Must Fall is kind of like a more ramped up badass version of Isabelle, and she's significantly on the page.
Yeah, she's great. Thank you, Brianna, for that question. That was a good one. We also have a question from Irene. It says, if you could travel back in time yourself, would you rather witness a specific historical event or moment, or just an average day that might have had some kind of importance later?
Significant event, with the caveat that I could travel back to the future at like the blink of my eyes. I would want to be in the French Revolution. I want to be in the Titanic. I want to be in these moments that will excite me and thrill me and making me like really understand like how good we have it. There's a statistic that says that like the world is very, very bad right now, but it's the safest it's ever been in our whole entire like existence, which doesn't feel like much, but you look back to like the Crusades and the world can be a very bad place. And I've never experienced that. And we were talking about earlier how I'm surviving this pandemic is watching the most bloody, gruesome animes that are around right now. And there's a part of me that really enjoys that. And I would like to like just go back in time, and like those are such important events in history that have like shaped the world as a whole. I would like to be there and see them.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's just a good one. And yes, with the caveat of blinking.
Like, I need to, the boat starts sinking. I don't need to do the seances or ritual. I need to be gone. I need to be out.
No chances. That's a good one. And we have a question from Grace that says, when did you decide who Andre would end up with? How did you choose? Maybe without actually saying.
So without giving any spoilers, it was decided at the very end. So this book went through 2 major revisions. I had drafted it originally, and then I told my editor, like, I want to change a lot about it, which would do a major rewrite. And so then I had a major rewrite of the book. And each time I always like question, like, who is he going to end up with? And I didn't know until probably the very last chapter of the book. And without giving it away, I picked one that had the most emotional resonance with Andre and also represented his change from the beginning of the book to the end, so that you would actually feel like there was character growth. That's a vague answer, but it's the best way I can give it without giving it away.
Yeah, I mean, like, having read it, I completely understand. But I think that's really interesting that you kind of waited until the end to decide. I think that that might have even helped in like really solidifying that love triangle.
I think so too. I'm also just very bad at making decisions. So like that was part of it too.
Like, I was like, which one? Off, honestly.
Right. What's the right choice here? There is no right choice in a book. That's the beautiful thing about it. I mean, there are some right choices, but most of the times there's no right or wrong choice in art. So I was like, what is the one I'm most happy with?
That's good. That's nice. Question from Katie says, if any person dead or alive could blurb your book, who would you want?
Katie, that's a hard question. Like, why didn't you like DM me this earlier so I could know? Because I don't
think about it.
I had to think about it because my boring answer is Oscar Wilde. Like, you know how people, especially during the pandemic, hyper fixate on things so that something becomes like the entirety of their personality. When I was in
Mhm.
high school, Oscar Wilde was the only, I was based, it was my senior year quote. I went like for like a historical person day as Oscar Wilde when I was first discovering my homosexuality. I'm like, I'm going to be the modern day Oscar Wilde. So I was a mess. But Oscar Wilde has influenced a lot of the banter in my books has come from Oscar
That's a good one though. I would be really curious to see like what Oscar Wilde would have to say about this book.
I feel like he
I
wouldn't like it. I think he was a little racist.
I mean,
Like,
kind of everybody around that time period was.
right. I think he would be like, who let this person write? And I'd be like, fair.
Okay. Crying in the corner. Thanks.
Right, basically.
Francis would like to know what made you want to write YA books?
I think that's a good question. To me, I discovered the most of myself in reading middle grade and YA books. When I was young, like those were a very big quintessential part of who I am. They helped me discover my sense of humor. They helped me discover what I care about, what I find important. And I also owe just like a lot of like being alive to being able to write and to be able to put myself on those pages and to feel those things. I don't have a middle grade voice. I can't write middle grade. I've tried so many times. I wish like that 13, 14 lower end of YA, upper end of middle grade, I could write. I just can't do it. I need to have action and blood on a page, which makes me sound a little bit more not insane than I actually am, I promise. But
we already decided that you're not okay. We already discussed that.
We already decided that. These are enjoyable to me to write, and you can't have those in middle grade. And also, YA is just a time when you're at that precipice of making your own life choices, and so much positive and negative that you choose is going to influence your life forever in ways that you think are going to like ruin you or set you up. And as you grow older, you realize that like life isn't just like one choice that changes everything. It's many choices, and you get many chances. And I like putting that on a page and having Black and queer characters like deal with those choices, because like I said earlier, many teens that were our age didn't have that in the past. And so being able to live that on the page, there's this quote that I saw from TikTok from an older gay guy that was like, many 20 and 30-year-olds are undoing the trauma that they had of being in the closet and coming to terms with their sexuality when they were teenagers in their 20s and 30s. And I've thought about that a lot with like being a Black and queer person who never saw themselves on the page. Doing this in YA helps me actually answer questions I'm still answering about myself.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very, very insightful. Elisa said, you mentioned that you know other YA authors. Do you have any books to recommend?
Again, I should have prepared this because I do. And I'm going to get up and get some books. Give me like 5 seconds because I have some books that are amazing. Okay, here we go. Do we have them? Okay. I'm just making sure I have all the books I'm currently reading. So, A Faux Love Story by Lone Lee. I'm currently reading that. It's an adorable rom-com, which, I mean, we always need some love. Wings of Ebony, which I'm sure everybody has heard of by now. I haven't started it yet, but it's like next on my to be read. You Should See Me in the Crown, which I mean, like, why am I even recommending this? Because like everybody's reading this. Leah's exceptional. Like I'm just like, Leah, can you leave some coins for the rest of us, please? The Project by Courtney Summers. When I talk about hyper fixating in 2018, 2019, I was nothing without Sadie. I would be in conversations with people about like, have you heard about the moon landing? I'd be like, but what about Sadie? Have you read Sadie yet? Sadie was everything.
We're talking about what's really important here.
Right. I get that we just had like midterms are coming up. But what about Sadie? Have you read the structure of this book? And I'm also reading The Firekeeper's Daughter, which is exceptional.
I'm currently reading that too, actually. Twinsies.
Twinsies, I'm on page 5, so you're probably right than me.
Oh no. That's funny. We have another question from Colleen that says, do you ever write a book with a thought of adding a sequel or even a prequel to your finished work?
See, I hate to put source books on the spot about this, but I do have a prequel in mind for yesterday's history. So, assuming the book sells well, maybe me and source book can enter the boardroom and like come up with like something that will work. But yes, some of my books that I come up with are very much like standalone books. There's nothing more that can happen with them. Some of them, especially my speculative ones, have the potential to be sequels. Not at all like, I really, really want this to happen, but if we get lucky and things happen, I think a good example is Darius the Great is Not Okay. Like, I know Adib didn't plan for that to be a sequel, but you guys like rallied behind it in such a great way that it got a sequel. Like, a lot of my books are like that.
That's awesome. I love that.
I don't like leaving the worlds instantly.
I love that the idea is there. And when we're done here, I would like to know what your idea for prequel is.
Yes. Yes.
We have a really good question from Grace that says, have any other authors had an influence on your writing?
Yes, two specific, well, I would actually say three. So I have taken a lot of what Leah Johnson taught me in You Should See Me in a Crown to really work on writing like my romantic scenes. I'm like drafting a YA rom-com just for like personal like wants and desires. And I used a lot of her writing and a lot of her lessons and talking to her on the phone to like really work and hone my craft on that. Alex London is a huge, huge champion of mine. I love him dearly. He's got me started in writing. I messaged him in 2012 on his website, like, I want to be a gay author. What do I do? And he answered me, somebody who had no business. And he's been a huge input for me for science fiction. And also Tiffany Jackson has been a great like advocate and ally of mine. And I've read like Grown so many times and Monday's Not Coming as a really like huge way to understand like how to write in spaces where Black authors aren't usually represented and how to like carve out space for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And I completely agree. That it looks like we have a couple more questions. We have one from Beth that says, has COVID impacted your creative process?
Oh, it actually supercharged it. So I didn't have to like travel for work. So that was a big benefit. I just like traveled like 45 minutes to an hour each day for work. So I spent a lot of time in my house alone. So I got to like write more. Like, am I saying supercharged? I think I wrote 3 books during the pandemic, 3 full books. I think I wrote 300,000 words during the pandemic.
Trophy? Where?
Here's the thing. I deserve a trophy, but I'm not going to get a trophy as long as the author by the name of Tess Sharp exists, who writes like 1.5 million words a year. Every single time that she's like, what's everybody's writing goal? She's like, I'm going to write 60,000 words this month. I'm like, I'm trying to survive, Tess. That's my goal. My goal is to not start a new book that I haven't finished. So the alone time has really helped me like draft. I think the biggest thing it's helped me do is really come up with creative ideas. Like, I have always thought that like what we could write was very limited about like what sells, which is like always a big thing because you never are guaranteed a sale. Adam Silvera mentioned it on his Twitter a couple days ago when he mentioned that like offhandedly, but also kind of seriously, there are a lot of POC authors who are writing fantasy, and many of them are doing it better than your echelon of like white authors that you consider to be like the best authors in fantasy. And I really have been thinking about that a lot and how like the Black experience and the POC experience actually comes into speculative works. And it's really pushed me to push harder to come up with different out of the box ideas, which can be either hit or miss, but it's like really been fun to stretch out my creativity.
That's really, really amazing. I feel like you're like the epitome of like when lockdown first happened, it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to be so creative and productive with all of this extra time. You really took that and ran with it.
What helped was that we went into lockdown in New York in March, and then I sold my 2-book deal to Berkeley, which was on proposal. So I had 5 chapters in April. So I was like, I have to write this by October. So I like, if I want to get paid, then I need to write. So that helps.
That's definitely a motivator. We have a really good question from Aaron that really kind of like encompasses all of our conversation here. And it says, what do you want readers to take away from yesterday's history?
So I think when I like did some rounds earlier this year for yesterday's history, I ended it by saying that yesterday's history is summarized into one question, which is, if you had as much time in the world, thanks to time travel, to become whoever you wanted to be, who would you become? I think a lot of us often struggle because of the society that we live in, pressures. with the idea of how much time do we have left in the world, even though we might be young, and like what do we want to be remembered for? And that really influences the choices that we make as people, consciously or subconsciously. And so I think what I like about Yesterday's History, and which helped me a lot as someone who's always like, am I going to leave my mark on the world, writing like I'm running out of time, is that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not be sure. In high school, I was never sure of what I wanted to do. And I like had panic attacks about it. Like if I didn't have my 10-year plan like planned out, then I was like, I'm a failure. And like, that's not at all how it is in life. And like I said earlier, like you think that, I think a good example is what college do you go to? And I'm sure there's people in this chat who are like, we are in March, so you might have already picked your colleges or you might be hearing back. I promise you, your college choice very, very rarely completely changes your life. It very, very rarely is gonna like derail you. There are some people who, yes, it is gonna like give you the best life experience, but there's very few who don't. There's very few who, you will make your life in the way that it needs to be. I promise you it will be okay. And I wanted to like kind of write a book that reflected that.
Yeah. I like that a lot. And I think that's especially like a very important message for a lot of teens. Because I too at that age is just like, I have a plan, and if I stray from it at all, my life is ruined.
Right. And that's like a big thing. I think that's also like a lot of American pressure too.
Yeah, I would agree. That's definitely more of an American thing. They put so much pressure on 16, 17-year-olds. Like, okay, what are you doing for the rest of your life? It's like,
no, exactly.
I don't know. What is.
I don't know like what I'm doing tomorrow.
Right. I don't even know what I had for lunch earlier. Like what, I don't know. I still feel that way, honestly. We have a question here from Cece that says, is it challenging to write rom-com after writing a fantasy sci-fi dystopian? Is it harder to create tension?
No. So, I mean, let me say no with a caveat. So I wrote my rom-com, and yes, I sold her a proposal, which means I didn't write the whole book. I wrote 3 chapters. But what you do not see is that my agent and I did 4 versions of 4 other books, each 50 pages long. So I really wrote like 250 pages before it sold to kind of come up with that tension. Rom-coms are harder, but also in some ways easier because they're formulaic. They're beats that you can follow. But at the same time, that means that like your books have to be creative so it doesn't feel repetitive. So it can be easier and harder. I have found that I love writing rom-coms. I absolutely love them. They are fun. They are just enjoyable to create like wacky situations to throw people in. It's just so much fun, and it's very like alleviating from having like intense Black Lives Matter conversations. So it's not harder, it's different. I usually don't write both of them on the same day. I usually alternate days so that I can be in the right mindset. I also have 2 different soundtracks that I write to, which helps.
Yeah. I would be so interested to see what your what's on your soundtracks for those.
Oh, I'll send you to
on your playlist. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to like be in your mindset. And then we have another question here from Meg that says, if you could co-write a book with any author, who would it be?
It would have to be, I think, Courtney Summers. And again, going back to Sadie, it will be Courtney Summers with a Sadie-esque twist with like an LGBT character or somebody, but also like a rom-com with Leah Johnson. I cannot like sing Leah Johnson's praises enough. So like any book event of mine, y'all gonna be asking me about like the complexity of the story. I'll be like, well, Leah Johnson said. So like that's just how. But no, I really love Leah. I love her pace, and I love how she also talks about being Black and queer in books in ways that is super accessible. And I think we need more authors like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. That I love that book so much. You should see me to Crown was incredible. I'm almost scared to say that I haven't read Sadie.
Don't say that to me. You can't say that to me. How you'd be like, ha, 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 it's so good.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I definitely read Sadie. It's my favorite book. You didn't hear it. Very fun. Thank you to everybody for submitting your questions. You had so many good questions.
So many.
And so for everybody, if you participated in the book club today, Sourcebook Spires are currently listing all of the winners in the chat, so definitely make sure you guys are checking that out. And if you did win, make sure that you email Lizzie. The email is also in the chat so that she can send you your prize. Congratulations.
Ooh, prizes.
Right? to Sophie, Francis, and Aiden for winning the prizes. So definitely make sure you guys send your emails over to Lizzie. So Kosoko, thank you so much for hanging out with me, for chatting with me, for giving us some more insight in your books and your writing process and just your life in general.
You were an amazing host. You did a great job.
I just basically had you talk the whole time.
I love talking. It's the Scorpio in me, so it's easy.
Oh, then we're going on great because I love asking questions. I'm nosy. I'm a nosy Leo. So perfect. But yes, thank you so much, not only for just being here, for sharing with us. Thank you for writing yesterday's history. Like, it was such an incredible book. I loved it so much. It gave me just like everything that I wanted and didn't even know that I needed. And I literally cannot wait for what else you're going to come out with.
Well, very soon. We don't have to wait that much longer.
I'm glad, because I'm not a patient person. So thank you again to everybody who's watched. Make sure that you do join us next time, Tuesday, May 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the thriller double feature event, which is going to be with Natalie Richards and Jesse Q. Sutanto. That event will also be linked in the chat. So if you guys want to sign up for it right now, you absolutely can. You'll get a reminder email closer to the date about it, and it's going to be great.
Yeah. Is it the Obsession? It's the Obsession, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Y'all need to read that.
Yes. I double that. So make sure you read it. So then make sure you sign up for the event so you guys can hear more about it, because it was really good. So thank you again,